Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer in Tel Aviv. As the Iran war plays out, as we continue to receive mixed messages from the White House regarding any chance of a movement to negotiations and ceasefire, and contradictory messages on peace talks from the Iranian regime, only one thing seems certain. Just as October 7th and the ensuing 2.5 years of war transformed Israel and Israelis, this Iran war and the steep price the country is paying for it will change us even more. And if the war alone doesn't do it, many of the actions of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government, moving controversial legislation ahead, annexation of the West Bank ahead while the missiles are dropping, will accomplish it. No one is more qualified to sit down and discuss the big picture of what's happening to Israel during this war than the man in charge of making sure that it all gets covered. Aluf Benn, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz. Aluf has, after all, been a leading journalist covering the country's leadership, foreign policy, and national security for more than 3 decades. My conversation with Aluf Benn is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions.
Haaretz Editor-in-Chief Aluf Benn, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Aluf, let's start with the sausage making, what's going on behind the scenes these days with you. What is it like to run an independent, critical news organization at wartime when you have a country rallying around the flag and trying to report in depth on what is happening when missiles are falling in and around your newsroom, your reporters and editors are sleep deprived? Is this challenging, or are you used to it by now, and now that we have a whole newsroom inside a bomb shelter, we're just able to continue as usual?
Well, first of all, we got used to these things. In the past 6 years, we had COVID, then we had October 7, and then we had the first round with Iran, and now the second and longer one. When it erupted on Saturday morning, the sirens started going off. The news desk gathered. We all gathered at the shelter, the basement. And most of the time, we're working as usual. I think the main difference, not just at Haaretz, but over Israeli society at large, but we felt it too very deeply between the current war and October 7, is that we were shocked at the time by the cruelty and surprise of the Hamas invasion. We were shocked by the number of the hostages, and we had people who were either attacked in their homes near Gaza or their family members were attacked, and other friends and family members were kidnapped or killed by Hamas. And many were called, immediately to reserve and so on. This is not the case today. We run to the shelters like everybody else, both in the office, at home. The atmosphere around, many stores and restaurants and so on are still closed in Tel Aviv. It's not the city that never sleeps that it used to be until 4 weeks ago. But it's not as shocking. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we are limited in our ability to cover the war because in Gaza, with all the difficulties, our reporters couldn't, they can still call people there. We can even call people in Lebanon, although it's somewhat trickier, but still people in Lebanon talk to our reporters. This is not the case in Iran. We have no direct sources there. We have to rely mostly on Western media, which is, it's easier on one hand, but on the other hand, it's not based on your demands or what you think your readers would need. In that respect, it's like covering a local and a foreign war at the same time, which was not the case in Gaza or even in Lebanon in the past 2.5 years.
We have people dying of missile strikes in the middle of Israel's central populated cities, a 70-year-old couple, getting killed by a missile in their living room in Beit Shemesh.
We had even one of our writers she went to the shelter down the street, and when the missile hit her apartment was blown up and she lost everything.
You've covered wars for more than 3 decades. Does this feel different? Does this feel new? Are we getting used to, the home front just being such integral part of the price of war than we used to? And by the home front, I'm talking about downtown Tel Aviv, downtown Jerusalem. We're not talking about border communities.
Well, beginning in 1991 with the first Gulf War, with the Iraqi missiles hitting Tel Aviv, when there were no air defenses, no missile defenses at the time. I don't want to say we got used to it, but it's familiar. And again, with Iran, the 10 or 5 or between 5 to 10 minutes early warning time allows people, if it's nighttime, to dress up, to go to shelters. The thing is, many people, and especially many people, spoke about the challenges in the newsroom. Many of our staff live in Tel Aviv, within walking or short driving distance to the office. And they live in old buildings, which, even if renovated, usually don't have safe rooms in their apartments. So in the middle of the night, they have to dress up, pick up the kids if they have, and go to some shelter down the street or further away. It's very uncomfortable. But even if you have a safe room, it's still not the lifestyle that you want. And since we don't have any clue when this is going to end, that strains it further. And since flights in and out of Israel are very restricted these days, so people who used to get on holidays for Passover when the kids are off school and so on, they can't do it now.
Aluf, you spoke about when it's going to end. We can't ignore the headlines, the confusing, contradictory headlines of the day. It seems, and this has been a theme over the past few months, that our fate is in the hands of President Donald Trump, and he's inconsistent. First, he threatened to bomb Iran's power plants within 48 hours. Then he turned around and said that Iran wants to settle and make a deal with him 5 more days before a bombing. Presumably, Saturday is the 5-day extension deadline. Iran, in the meantime, first denied any talks are happening. Trump is now saying, yeah, we're talking and they're going to agree to never have a nuclear weapon. They're denying it. I mean, we've been here before. At least twice Trump has been, using negotiations kind of as a way to play for time before the next attack. While he's making these statements, we've got thousands of American Marines and paratroopers coming to the region. So where do you put your money? Does Trump really want to climb down off this tree? Does he need to get the Straits of Hormuz opened? Or do you think this war is going to expand and intensify, possibly to a ground invasion of Iran?
Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, once I interviewed him for one of our democracy conferences. And it was before the American election. And he said, well, if anybody tells you that they can guess what Donald Trump is going to do, don't trust them. So I don't want to mistrust myself, so I'm not going to say he's definitely going to do this or that. Look, it's war. The Iranians were hit. I think that all those arguments that they've barely been scathed, it's just business as usual for them, I don't think so. I think they were hit hard. But the regime, the government, in some form or way survived, and there's still some mechanism there to give orders to the armed groups at all levels, internal, external, missile command, all those batteries or whatever units controlling the Straits of Hormuz, etc. And there's also a PR machine and a diplomacy machine. So they are able to negotiate. Iran was not invaded. The numbers of casualties there are far less than in Gaza. And even in Gaza, the Hamas is still in power. So it can go on for a long time. I have no idea if there's anyone in Iran who's willing to take Trump's deal. And Trump's deal has been very consistent. Now, Trump is sometimes saying, contradictions within the same sentence. But his diplomacy with Iran has been very consistent. Throw away nuclear ambitions under whatever formula and you'll get recognition or at least acceptance of the Islamic Republic by the United States, which wasn't the case, to remind you, since 1979. There are no diplomatic relations between Iran and the United States. There were many conflicts involving them directly or through proxies. So it's no small thing. And if Iran can get off the sanctions, there's a lot of enormous economic potential there. They have very educated population, very good infrastructure. You could see, if they need to go day after day to bomb all these military factories and research facilities, imagine what kind of investment and human capital was needed to build all these things. So I wouldn't underestimate the economic opportunity for Trump, for the United States, for whoever is going to take part in it, in the renovation of Iran. This is not some resort in Gaza. We're talking here about one of the largest countries in the world with one of the most educated and sophisticated populations. So the opportunity is there. The way it appears now is that it's going to escalate. But, I'd be happy to be wrong. But when we see, forces moving in that direction, the same was before, the attack of February 28. We saw the aircraft carrier coming to the region, docking at Haifa, and, it was in plain sight. So you don't do that just, obviously this carrier or others have to be somewhere. Still, when you deploy such a force, it's usually more difficult to take it back without doing anything after making all these statements and so on. And the victims here, if that deal goes through, if not now, maybe after another round of escalation, in the end of the day, those people who were thrown under the bus or under fire, the civilians in Iran, all those people who wanted to change their government and to make a freer society and were killed or chased and are too afraid to do it again today, they're not part of that deal.
They're what started it in the first place. This whole momentum only really began in January with the protests.
I believe, and from what we read around and what we knew, there was an argument for many years about the fragility of the Iranian government. And after the protest, it was clear to some people, and reportedly the head of Mossad, Dadi Barnea, that this was the opportunity, to bomb Iran, decapitate the leadership, and then there would be another round of protest and the security apparatus would just fall apart or defect or whatever. That has not happened. But you can argue that it has not happened yet. In most cases, to replace regimes, you need someone on the ground. It doesn't have to be an American force or the Soviet forces bursting into Berlin in 1945 or the North Vietnamese army occupying the South Vietnam. There are many examples like that. And even in Syria, to topple Assad, in the end of the day, a civil war was not enough. You needed an external force backed by Turkey taking over Damascus to change the regime completely in Syria. Can that happen in Iran? Even if they talk about using ground forces, it appears to be like more pinpoint operations, like trying to catch some of the uranium or the leadership. To occupy Iran, you're going to need hundreds of thousands of troops that simply don't exist. Even if the Europeans and others would want to join, I don't think the West has the capacity to occupy Iran on its own.
There's an amazing level of support in the Israeli public for this war. If you look at Jewish Israelis, we're talking about 90%, practically consensus. Is this because they've been fed this narrative for so many years by Netanyahu? And you say, respected figures like Dadi Barnea believe this is an opportunity that could not be missed. Is it a question of that, there's just a convincing case for having done this, for wanting it to continue as long as possible? Or again, is this the propaganda machine, making people believe that it's good for us?
The propaganda machine or Netanyahu, they did not invent the Islamic Republic. They did not invent the hostility of the Islamic Republic towards Israel, which is unprecedented. They don't even have the argument that, Israel expelled the Palestinians and inherited their land in 1948 and then put many of them under military occupation in 1967 and bombed them in Gaza or before that in Lebanon or what have you. They don't have any moral claim against Israel beyond the argument that Israel helped the Shah of Iran before. But Israel was not alone, and many other countries that had very good relationship with the deposed Shah of Iran and supplied arms to him and so on. They have diplomatic relations and trade with Iran without any problems. So and beyond the rhetoric, Iran has built a ring of fire around Israel, arming Hezbollah in Lebanon, arming some of the Palestinian groups, the Houthis, supporting Assad to fight Israel, and developing a nuclear program. There's a debate whether they really mean it or not, but judging by the facts, to enrich uranium to 60% level, that has only one. It has no economic, no civilian uses. It's just to create some sort of deterrence or pre-nuclear deterrence. And so when you add this together, that's why the Israeli public has no mercy for the Iranian regime or for fighting them. And so far at least, the price was not, and there are some layers here. First of all, the success of the surprise attack against the Supreme Leader Khamenei and his coterie on February 28, that reminds many Jewish Israelis of the glorious days of 1967, surprise attack, which was able within 3 hours to destroy the Arab air forces around Israel and basically win the war and triple the size of Israel within 6 days. Now, there's a lot of support to that kind of thing. It's not a ground operation where you risk soldiers' lives. And at the beginning, the hits on Israel were more tolerable. The question here is if we are going towards a war of attrition. A Ukraine style, it's different because in Ukraine it's really ground forces fighting in trenches. But if it's like a prolonged, and many more casualties, hundreds of thousands, especially on the Russian side. But we were not talking so far about that kind of war. But if it goes on and on and on, and people are asked to be calm and get used to be hit by 10, 20 missiles a day, that might cause public fatigue and reflect back against the government. Closing the circle, the decision whether to continue the war or not, and under what terms, is Trump's. It's not Netanyahu's. So anti-war protest in Israel is practically meaningless. Once Israel tied itself in the United States.
Even the hostage families ended up addressing their protests to Trump because they realized that he was the one.
He got hostages back. But it's not that. The Israeli dependence on the United States deepened in the past 2.5 years like never before in terms of military aid, diplomatic cover, and now joint operation, which is, you have the U.S. and Israeli militaries woven together. That was unprecedented and even unthinkable because for many years, the Americans, they were willing to give Israel a lot of financial aid and supply it with the most sophisticated weapon systems. But they were, for many, many years, very shy on direct, visible military cooperation with the IDF. Mostly because they did not want to alienate the Arab armies with which they had very close ties, mostly the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians. That was changed by Trump several years ago. And now they're working together. So it's not just Netanyahu who can just say, I call it quits.
No tiny, cynical part of your brain is saying that, this is what Netanyahu wants, eternal war for us to be focused on staying alive in missiles. Nobody's talking about Qatargate. Nobody's talking about his criminal case. Nobody's talking about accountability for October 7th. There's no part of us that does not trust our leadership because they maybe feel like continuing conflict is good for them.
Well, clearly, up until February 27th, you could not turn on any TV channel any news site, any newspaper, any form or way of media in Israel without seeing some footage of October 7 or an interview with one of the hostages returning or their families. It disappeared. For 3.5 weeks now, it disappeared. As you said, staying alive, physically, financially, psychologically, socially, is now more important than recalling what happened 2.5 years ago, especially with hostages back. The turning point here was the return of the hostages, because that was a real moral and emotional burden to many Israelis. And with them back, all of them, that changed. So that gave a lot of leverage to Netanyahu. Now, the Netanyahu coalition, they're still pushing forward their project of building a theocratic autocracy instead of the, I would say, mostly liberal kind of democracy that Israel, at least within the Green Line, has had since 1948.
Yes, so let's talk about some of those moves that they're making, again, because we work at Haaretz, and your job is to oversee that we continue to cover all aspects of the country and not only the count of missiles and bombings on either side. There are some pretty significant things happening. The most attention was on Monday night, the Knesset approving a law allowing religious courts to arbitrate civil disputes if both sides agree, basically expanding the power and the influence of the religious courts. A lot of people were very upset by that. And also this week, a Knesset committee has moved the law ahead that would impose a death penalty on Palestinians who are convicted of terrorism. And the goal is to get this passed before Passover. Is the timing of this, first of all, taking advantage of the fact that the country is focused on other things, but are we talking about moving in directions that please the religious and right-wing members of the coalition ahead of the next elections?
That's the easy way of looking at it. The deeper way is to see that Netanyahu, since his re-election in November 22 and the forming of the current government in December 2022, has been working relentlessly towards the goal of making Israel, the public sphere of Israel, more religious and its governance more autocratic. And the chances of replacing its leader slimmer. And that hasn't changed despite October 7. And I would say, well, for a while it slowed down, but it gave Netanyahu even more motivation to do that because he wanted to escape any responsibility and accountability for the October 7 failure to anticipate and to respond to the invasion by Hamas and to the massacre and the communities around Gaza. So it slowed down, but now it's running full speed ahead for political reasons, because we're entering an election cycle, because the Knesset session is about to end several weeks ahead, because of all these political, tactical reasons. But strategically, that has been the main thrust of Netanyahu, and including getting somehow stopping his trial, and he's trying to promote his pardon request, which is basically a request to stop the trial without any political or criminal or other consequences.
And this week, the opinion was submitted by a replacement for the Justice Minister, giving the Justice Ministry's opinion to President Isaac Herzog, the Pardons Department of the Justice Ministry, recommending a pardon to Netanyahu in his criminal cases, accepting Netanyahu's argument that a pardon for him would allow the rift in the nation to be healed.
Yeah, and free the Prime Minister's time to win the war against our fierce enemies, and so on and so forth. Well, it's now in the hands and the pen of President Herzog.
And what do you think he'll do?
I think that deep and even not so deep in his heart, he wants to stop that trial. And he tried to convince both sides in the trial to reach some sort of plea bargain or some other deal. That failed. I think that he would want to give the pardon. He still seeks some support without just being, just appearing to be the total stooge of Netanyahu.
You think it'll be a wartime pardon? Like he really needs to run this war and therefore he needs to be pardoned?
There are several ways to do that. But clearly the argument would be that that we were in war and at war, and so on. I don't know. It's still possible. It's not impossible. It's not that Herzog would rule against it by all means. It appears as if he's waiting for the right public opportunity to do that without getting too much heat from people you would like to be in touch with or rely on for future political prospects or for whatever reason like that.
Aluf, I remember interviewing you sometime in the past year or two. It's all become a big blur. I remember discussing, what drives Netanyahu, and you said that one of his main goals was to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. One thing that Haaretz has covered and really tried to keep its eye on all through the Gaza war and now through the Iran war is what is happening on the West Bank. Do you feel like we're using the cover of these wars to sort of solidify de facto annexation since we haven't explicitly passed a law annexing?
The short answer is yes. And it's not just in the West Bank. It's in Gaza, where Israel still holds 58% of the territory, where all population was expelled, driven out. It's in South Lebanon, where Israel has driven out hundreds of thousands of refugees and is now threatening to keep them at bay and just occupy the territory, turn it into a kind of a population-free security zone across the border. The further right to Netanyahu, they openly talk about building settlements in Gaza and in South Lebanon. This is one way of seeing it. But the other is, look, countries at war, governments at war, use it to limit civil liberties. We see it in Russia in the past 4 years very visibly, where the last remaining bastions of some sort of opposition to President Putin have been wiped out. We see it in a different way, and it's less politically correct to discuss it in the West, in the Ukraine. And, we saw it in the United States and Britain during the Second World War, not just in the Soviet Union or worse. So it's not a surprise that countries at war see less public resistance to changes in governance, to limits on civil liberties. And we see the same in Israel. Well, we're not in the situation of Russia or of Turkey these days. We're far from there. But there are very strong forces in the government, in the coalition, and I believe the Prime Minister is behind it as well, although he'd rather have other people speak up about it. They want to see a less democratic Israel. They don't want to have independent institutions that can challenge the executive power. They hate it. And that's why they're trying to get rid of the Attorney General, was a very powerful position or institution in the Israeli makeshift constitutional construction. We don't have a constitution. But even if Israel had a constitution itself doesn't mean anything. Syria, the Syrian constitution, I once read it, the Assad constitution. It's a brilliant document about freedom of speech and human rights. So the thing is not to have some paper with the title constitution. The thing is where society is open enough to allow criticism of the government, and where you have independent institutions in the government, be it regulators, courts, public servants, that can stand up to the political masters and say, this should not be done. This should not be done like that, etc. And that this government is dedicatedly and with enjoying full consensus in the coalition is trying to erode that kind of independence.
And that's why many people, at least in my circles, in the left, center even, are saying that these upcoming elections this year are the last-ditch elections, that if we get another government like this doing what it's doing, there's going to be no more room for you and me, and definitely our children and grandchildren. There's a lot of fatalism, and also among American Jews in the diaspora are saying, Israel will no longer be a liberal-minded democracy.
It is a serious threat. It's a very serious threat. I recall my liberal friends in America, even when George W. Bush was about to be reelected, saying they would move to Canada. And obviously when Trump was elected, and again, they haven't. Very few people move to Canada, and even in Israel, where more people emigrate, it's not going to be that they're going to disappear tomorrow. But we're going to see much narrower space for liberal ideas, for ideas of peace with the Palestinians, for ideas of Jewish-Arab coexistence as equals, rather than master and servant, or some subject under occupation. We're going to see some restrictions on scientific research, which would drive academics and scientists out. We see that, and we're going to see more religion and more religious demands in public space. It's not going to be, I don't think that Tel Aviv is going to become Tehran the day after the election if Netanyahu wins with this coalition. But clearly it's their direction. They never did anything off the record, in hiding, in secret. They said from day one what they were trying to achieve, and they're working very systematically. We see it in the West Bank. We see it vis-a-vis the courts. We see it vis-a-vis the media. They're working systematically. They don't win every battle. They don't win every battle once, they initiated it. But it's a very systematic drive towards a theocratic autocracy in place of what Israel was until 3, 4, or even more than a decade ago.
And with a war-weary population and opposition, do you see any chances of turning this around in the next elections?
Look, chances always exist. Clearly, Netanyahu has the lead these days because there's no real alternative offering a change of direction, just a change of style. Naftali Bennett shares the same exact ideology as Netanyahu, using force, keeping the West Bank, settlements, expansion, and a very capitalist, opportunistic economic system with but big subsidies to some parts of society. I don't think that Bennett differs. The main difference is that Bennett calls to draft the ultra-Orthodox kids, which apparently is not going to happen, and Netanyahu doesn't say it. But Bennett did not try to do anything in that direction when he was the prime minister. So the choice is not here between very different views of Israel. It's a guy on Netanyahu and a younger version and less corrupt version of Netanyahu competing against him. Is that enough to make a change? That remains to be seen. The Israeli economy so far has survived brilliantly throughout the war. And it's not like, I recall that during the bus bombings of the Second Intifada were 11% unemployment. Now it's 3%. The dollar was then 5 shekels per dollar. The beginning of on October 7th, it was 3.76. Now it's 3.10, 3.12. People still have to feel the economic heat of the war. And they are told by the mainstream media that if they travel abroad and speak Hebrew, some anti-Semites or Muslims are going to hit them or boycott them or whatever. So that rallies people around the country, around the flag, which again supports the incumbent government. And the other advantage of Netanyahu is that he can survive with a draw and call another election. So the opposition, which is very disorganized, has very little to say, mostly in fervent support of the war against Iran, even suggesting further targets to Netanyahu because in their eyes there was not enough bombing and not enough destruction in Tehran to tell the voters about. So it's difficult to make a change, but it can happen. If the war drags on with no end in sight, people might get weary and even if not vote for someone else. The only time when Netanyahu lost the election was when a lot of his bloc voters stayed at home. And then they came out again in 22. But I think the same is true in many democracies. You can't switch people from right to left or vice versa. It's voting or not voting within your bloc.
You're going to make sure that all of the Haaretz readers at least are motivated to get out and vote.
Of course, for the right people.
Aluf Benn, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to us. Stay safe and get some sleep between missile sirens.
Exactly. Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Aluf Benn, and to producer and editor Adi Shacham. If you'd like to keep listening to the podcast and never miss an episode, subscribe to us on Apple, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a comment and a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all of the updates on the Iran war, as well as all the rest of the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.